Take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I'm a human being, god damn it! My life has value! It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
Hi, welcome to Truth or Talk. I'm April and
Virstyne Henry.
You can check out our website at truthertalk.com. Today we're going to have James Corbett of the Corbett Report, which is really, really cool because it's been a long time coming. We've been following his work for many years, and I'm excited to have him on today.
I know, and we tried to get him last round, but just time, we just couldn't figure out a good time. So we finally have him, and it's really cool because we're really inspired by his. He was one of the shows for sure that we definitely listened to when we were inspired to do our own show. So it's coming full circle, which is cool.
Yeah.
It's always cool to meet somebody that we that we listen to, and it's kind of coming full circle. So
for sure.
Get a chance to tell them, yeah. If you get a chance to tell them too, I'm sure that'll make them feel good. They know that they've inspired somebody.
Yeah, and it's true because he's one of them, and we had Truth or Real Sonia, she was another one, and James Corbett of the Community Monarchy, we had him on, and those were all people that when we were kind of first waking up, that we were listening to, who we probably don't listen to that much anymore, but when we were first starting to get into it, that they scheduled last time, and there were some technical things, and he's tricky a little bit because he's in Japan, and but he's very brilliant and really, a knowledgeable guy on a lot of different subjects. So I'm glad to have him on. He's chill. He's very chill. Yeah.
Except that one time I saw, like, when Fukushima happened, and I think it was like Nancy Snyderman said that a little radiation's good for you, just a little bit, and he went off on her, and I never seen him angry up until that point, and it was great. It was great because she's
an evil bitch. Yeah. Yeah. She's a horrible person, so she deserves that. Working on our show today. It's going to be a great show because we've been wanting to talk to him for a long time. So that was the point. And he doesn't generally get mad, but Nancy Snyderman pissed him off. And he's in Japan, so he's right in the line of fire there with the Fukushima thing. Or I don't know how close he is to it, actually, so we'll ask him that when we bring him on.
And I had no idea how bad it was until Fukushima happened, how they've built basically all of these facilities around the world that can't be turned off. You can't turn them off, but yet they can leak and basically, cause destruction of the earth. Who agrees to this stuff,
It's true. I don't know.
I have to wonder. You think about people that are in power, and either they're really, really just dumb, like Looney Tunes dumb, like, Bugs Bunny villain dumb, or they know what they're doing, It's really bizarre how dangerous nuclear facilities are.
Yeah, it is, and it's I don't know, when they first came out, there was a big outcry against it. A lot of people were afraid of they were afraid of leaks, they were afraid, and then also I think too that, there's an element of it is how much of it could be used for potential for war, or what are we getting this energy for, why aren't we just using it, different sources of energy, and so there was all this sort of outcry, but it kind of just fizzled. Nobody really cares anymore. No one really talks about it anymore. And
because people aren't educated about it. It's the same. I've noticed the same pattern with vaccines, the medical industry. As reading into the history of vaccinations. like if you read Suzanne Humphrey's book, we're always advertising her book on the show, but it's a great book. But she, I was just astounded to realize how many people were against vaccination, because if you were, to leave it up to the media nowadays, they would just have you believe that it started with Andrew Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy, and there are a lot of even doctors, people in the scientific community writing out against vaccination, yet because of, the media and, monetary influence, they were able to kind of squash those people and just go ahead with their own agenda and not care. I even read an account where Edward Jenner, there were people that tried to replicate his study or his experiment with no success, and it actually had devastating results, and they reported it to him, and he just ignored them and kept on doing what he wanted to do. So, kind of same thing. It seems like happens with nuclear, with nuclear energy. That it's they. I can't think of her name. Somebody was telling me about a famous. I think she was a female scientist. My friend Patrick knows, and I can't think of her name. I can't remember her name, but she was a huge advocate against nuclear power, and they didn't care. They're like, "Oh, shut up, woman." I don't say that somebody like Oppenheimer was bad, and even Alfred Nobel. Do you know about the Nobel Peace Prize? And Alfred Nobel, he invented dynamite. Alfred Nobel invented dynamite, but he wanted to use it, I think, for construction and buildings and stuff, and he was really upset that people were using it for bombs. So he felt really bad about his invention being used to hurt people, and that's why he created the Nobel Peace Prize. So the money that goes to fund Nobel laureates comes from the profits of dynamite.
Wow,
yeah,
that's a lot of profits over the years. So his family, they take on the they take that on, I suppose. I guess it's still within the family, or do you know?
I don't know. But I know that's why he created the Nobel Peace Prize, because not the Peace Prize. I mean all the Nobel prizes. Just want to like what peace, literature, chemistry, medicine. I think physics. It's a few categories, but he created it because he wanted to encourage people to be better and better humanity with their inventions, out of guilt.
And that's right, and that's the saddest thing too, because then the people that win those prizes are often so corrupt and evil and just so who's in charge
or they're corrupted.
voting?
They're corrupted.
Some are just evil, I think. Some are just straight up.
Well, now, okay, well, you think of somebody like Al Gore, right? That's what you're thinking, or Obama, right? You're thinking about those people. But I think there are people that are really, trying to do good with their knowledge, science, and, maybe they might invent something or have an insight in. But there are people that are above that corrupt that,
But didn't also, Henry Kissinger win a Nobel Peace Prize? And what would be sort of... He's one of the people that would be above that.
Oh, yeah, I think it's possible. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I guess what I could say, what I think is maybe it's been infiltrated. It didn't initially start off with those intentions.
No,
I know. Because what they do is when people see that somebody wins a Nobel Peace Prize, they're automatically deified, and then that person that wins can do whatever the hell they want. Hence, Obama winning the Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing and actually creating more wars,
Exactly. Yeah, and it's sort of like the nonprofit organizations. A lot of them start off with somebody's desire to try and help someone else, other than like the American Cancer Association, which was started by the Rockefellers. But I'm thinking of Autism Speaks, which was started by the grandparents of a child with autism. They started it, with good intention, and then it just basically got taken over, and then just became this massive, power to just make a bunch of money off of it, and essentially just look for ways to drug the kids, and find pharmaceutical solutions and so forth. So just like all these other organizations like Susan G. Komen, they just, team up with Big Pharma and then just become a a way to make money for pharma, which as if they need it.
Yeah.
But it's like it's the same thing as the Nobel Prize. It's like it just gets co-opted at one point, and then basically it's just whatever origins it may have started with. The intentions might have been good in the beginning. It certainly didn't pan out that way, unfortunately.
Wow. Well, this is why people too. Where's that? It's like that quote from the Bible that says, "People perish for lack of knowledge." So the fact that they're able to get over on us is the fact that we're not educating ourselves. We're not educated about this stuff. Because had the public known more about nuclear power and the complications and dangers of it, then I think there would have been more of a drive and push from the public to look for alternative sources of energy.
I think that they did, though. That's the point I was making before, is that there was that push against it in the 50s and 60s.
But I mean, it had to be larger, right? Like a larger focus. You know what I mean?
It was a large focus. It was just quelched. It was just basically like the whole history of it, of all of that movement, just like with the vaccine movement, the anti-vaxxers. That was a huge anti-vax movement from the get-go. And that's what people don't realize. They're like, I had this conversation with someone not that long ago, and she was like, well, they've changed. They're not the same. Vaccines aren't the same as they used to be. And I'm like, well, what do you mean that they've changed? I'm sure that they've changed a bit, like in the essence of how they're made.
And they just added more toxin.
Right. I'm like, I don't know that they. Well, that was her point. She was like, well, because of GMOs and things like that, they've changed. And I said, I'm not really sure what your point is, because they've never been safe. So if you mean that they've changed for the worse or for the better, that's debatable, because there was problems with them from the beginning. And so there were fewer, we know that, and that may be why there were fewer problems. But there's a lot more now, and before they had complete, immunity from liability, the pharmaceutical companies, there were a lot fewer. But there's always been an outcry against them. There's always been people who were aware of their dangers. It's not like this is anything new, as Suzanne Humphrey, as you mentioned in the beginning. As Suzanne Humphrey points out in her book, her historical evidence. And the same is true with the nuclear power. I don't think it's a lack of knowledge. I think the knowledge is there. It's just it gets sort of
It gets gross. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say.
It gets like a curtain, like the veil falls over it or whatever.
Okay. Well, this is what I see too. Being a teacher and knowing how people are indoctrinated through education and seeing it happen with my own eyes, I'm just thinking, like, when I read, little snippets or stories through the years about certain scientific advancements, they always leave a lot of knowledge out. They always pick what's beneficial for the people that it's going to get the greatest benefit from, as far as like them making money off of it. So they squelched it through dumbing down the public, and the public isn't knowledgeable. Does that make sense? So it's like if more people knew about it, like through schools and stuff like that, like I don't know, then there'll be more of a public outcry. Kind of like with the global warming thing, like how they put that shit in textbooks and stuff, and children are all up on that. They're like, oh, the polar bears are dying. You have like fucking 5-year-olds that would tell you off and be like, you can't take hot showers because, they learn that and shit in school. Right. It's being, my thing is, my argument is the public has been systematically dumbed down, and that was their way of also through media, of course, but that was their way of squelching it. So now people don't aware, because I wasn't aware. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. I was like appalled. I had no idea, and a lot of people didn't, until I started looking into it myself. And I don't know a lot about it, but just the part that I did look into, I was just like, damn, like nobody, how did they even allow this to happen? And it's just this whole thing that we give our trust way too easily to people above us.
That's a good point.
Above us. I mean, not even above us, but like they're not above us, but like they, we think they're above us because they have a certain profession. So therefore, we don't think we'd reserve the right to go and research things for ourselves, because we can't possibly know more than a scientist, that's been doing it for 4 years. And it's not really about knowing more than the scientist, but it's about comparing and contrasting information from other scientists and the official story that you've been told to make up your own decision. Because either way, whether, you have is telling you that nuclear, energy is good, and you have another scientist telling you that nuclear energy is bad, you're not going to maybe have the years of schooling that they did, but you're still going to have to pick and choose, right? You're automatically picking the one that's saying it's good because that's what you've been indoctrinated with. So why not have the liberty to make up your own mind and kind of, to pull from other sources of information and make an informed decision, But people don't think they have the right to do that.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up about the school, because it's almost like as soon as it gets put into a textbook, or as soon as it gets put into the teacher's curriculum, then they validate it. But if you tell them that information has been concealed, or they don't give you the full story, or they don't give you both sides, or they don't give it, that all these things, the people don't believe it because they go, well, why didn't it get into the textbook? Well, because there's certain people that don't want it to go into the textbook.
Yeah, look who writes the textbooks. Look who, I think Bill Gates has his hand in Pearson education. I just have such disdain for him because he has his hand in education and health, and two things that are dear and near to my heart. And, I'm just like, oh, what a jerk, dude. And to me, what kind of ticks me off, too, is, I've heard people, get so giddy about Common Core, and they're like, oh, well, people like Bill Gates supports Common Core. But I'm like, Bill Gates didn't do Common Core? So why is he promoting something that he wasn't educated in?
Right. Yeah, and wasn't he like a high school dropout or something like that? Didn't he have that, or he didn't finish college or something? He's a college dropout. So why is he sitting here going and, pumping it for everybody else when he's saying, but I can be successful? So in other words, I'm a genius, therefore I can be successful without an education, but you need an education. Not only that, but you need me to micromanage it for you so that you can become, it's like, it's so condescending if you really think about it,
Yeah. Well, then people, it's so funny. I think I might have told you this. I think I might have talked about this on one of the shows. But, I drive for Lyft, and I had a passenger who was a microbiologist, and I was actually driving him to an interview. And I just happened to have Suzanne Humphrey's book there. And I was telling him, I wanted to see what he would say. I wanted to see what he, if he could, answer any of the facts or, information that I put before him. And he really couldn't. And one of the things he said was like, oh, well, you do research, so do you do work with rats or frogs? And I was like, no, but the people that I reference do. But then I thought about it later. I'm like, do I need to do research with rats or frogs in order to have an opinion? Like, that's just really condescending, But I also realized he was threatened because he couldn't compete. It was probably really embarrassing for him,
Right. Yeah, he didn't. Right. So he had to throw it back at you, well, you've never done an experiment in the lab.
I've never tortured animals and done vivisection. So obviously my opinion is invalid. But I know it was nice about it. It was an amicable conversation. I later found out he gave me a low rating, but even though I was really nice and I accommodated him, as a driver, and I was really good at that part. But I think that he probably doesn't ever want to see me again.
He give you a low rating? Oh my God!
Yeah,
how rude.
Rating. Yeah. I've actually had a couple of conversations with people on that subject, and a couple of them were really nice. I don't know. I don't know if I only know that he gave me a low rating because I only had a very limited riders that day, and only a couple or something at that time period. And I know the other one didn't give me a low rating because they did it in front of me. So I'm like, oh, it had to have been him, you know.
Yeah, you got a low rating.
Yeah,
because you don't work with frogs in a lab, so you don't know nothing. So I'm gonna give you a low rating.
Yeah, obviously, you know.
1 star.
But, you know, I feel like I can tell you this, and I hope our listeners, maybe it's something our listeners can ponder, but sometimes too, I feel like I'm fighting against people's conditioning of what they think I should know based on stereotypes. So whether me being a woman, whether me being a black woman, whether me being a person of color, whether me being younger than them, whether me not being in the scientific community, whether not being in the particular field of science that they're in, it all like counts against me. Sometimes I feel that there are people that are like that, you know, that they can't take it if you were one of those things and you knew more than them and just like fucking rocks the world. They don't know what to do, and you know, that's when they just automatically dismiss you as crazy, you know.
Yeah, it's right.
They're just
that
like,
is
oh,
a
well,
good point.
you're
Yeah.
just crazy. You know what I mean? So you can be a doctor and you can go through medical school, but all you're learning is how to manage diseases. You're not learning what causes the disease. You're not learning how to cure the disease. You're not, learning how to really work with your patients and with them in order to help them, but instead that you're better than them and you are, that they're basically not as smart as you are. So therefore you tell them what to do instead of working with them to both try and figure out a solution. It's just disgusting how this whole system has been, kind of set up this way. But I applaud the doctors who aren't like that. There's some doctors that aren't like that. But it takes a lot. It takes a strong person to break away from that, I think. Or also just, it's become the system where we don't work together, It's like you kind of put the responsibility on somebody else, and then, but then people could use that responsibility in order to deceive you. Because they know that they know that you're not going to really look into the area that you're into. Does that make sense? It's like
yeah. No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, they know you're not going to look into it as deeply as, or you're not going to go and I guess check their bullshit. You're going to just like believe it for the most part.
Yeah, and I think, like that guy I was talking to, I think he believes his own bullshit, but I'm sure that he was going to an interview to work in a lab. He's probably just like a trained lab technician, I mean, a microbiologist, but he just probably does what they tell him to do. I'm sure he doesn't keep up with the current medical literature. I'm sure he's not active, and trying to think about other inventions or discoveries and stuff, because he wouldn't be going to a job interview. So he's at the mercy basically of somebody giving him a job instead of trying to figure things out for himself, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I know. No, that makes sense. I know what you're saying. Yeah, it's like how
I'm sure so because everything is so compartmentalized, right? So people that make the vaccines, they know how to make the vaccines. They know that they get them from, whatever animal cell that they're growing them on, right? And then they put all the adjuvants and mix it everything up together. A lot of them probably never taken the time to actually read the literature, do the research on how all of this actually affects a human body, right? They're not going into toxicology. They're not looking into neurology. They're not looking into hematology or long-term effects of what they're doing. So they don't know. And it's sad. Scientists are on the mercy of whoever funds them. So that's the thing. I mean, if you create a product, that the public can use, then you're getting profit from the public, right? You're giving them product. They're buying your product. They like it. They'll tell their friends, and or they'll keep coming back depending on what the product is. And that's how you make your profit. But if you're a scientist, you basically have to wait for an opening like at a university or a project that somebody is giving you money to research. That's the thing, and I think that that's a huge problem with with how this information is kept, under wraps.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because it's true. I mean, the person has given them the money to fund the project to come up with the outcome that they desire. So, therefore, that's what they're going to look for, and they're not going to look into these other areas, like you say. It's totally compartmentalized. I can speak on that a little. My aunt was worked as a lab technician, and she worked in the labs that made that put the vaccines together, or they drew, put the vials together that drew people's blood. She was actually a blood tech, but she worked also in some labs where they actually put some of that stuff together. And she said that one time we were talking about vaccines and autism, and she said that she was aware of the whole idea that mercury caused it and mercury was toxic. She goes, but we had more exposures when we were kids in the 50s. We had there was mercury in like medicines, there was mercury in all these other kinds of things. And then she's like, and the mercury in the vaccines, it's just this much. And she like puts her little finger together like it's a tiny, like it's half an inch or something. Just this much that goes into the vial. And I said, well, but then there's a whole another system that it goes through. When you guys had it on your skin, or if you had it in your, obviously that's toxic. But when you inject
because don't they have to wear gloves and stuff when they even get
handling it? Yeah, absolutely, right, absolutely. Even the guy that
it's not, you can't inject it. I'm sorry, go on. Even what?
I was saying, even the guy that we go see, that we do energy medicine with, who does allergy eliminations through energy medicine. Whenever something comes up with mercury, he's just looking at the energy, vial. It's not even actual mercury. It's just the, through, just the energy of it. And he doesn't even want to touch it. He's like, I don't even like touching these things. It makes me uncomfortable. He's like, I can feel it's toxicity. I can feel it on my skin, even though it's not the actual substance. It's through a piece of glass. But anyway, but she was saying, I said, but there's a whole other process that it goes through when it comes in through injection, and it doesn't go through the regular avenues of the immune system like it would if you ingested it, or if you got it through your skin. Not to say that those aren't damaging ways to insert to get mercury into your body. It's really one of the most toxic substances in the world, no matter how you take it in. I said, but if you get it in an injection, you really have no process of elimination, and it's capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier, which means that it can actually just be sitting in your brain. And she was just kind of like, what? She had no clue. She had no idea that was the case.
Yeah.
And that totally surprised her. And then I started talking about some of the other things that were in there, and I go, well, and plus you're not even in chemistry. You took organic chemistry in school. You know that there's synergy when you mix certain ingredients, a certain amount of mercury with a certain amount of aluminum, you have a certain outcome. And that, these types of things, they're putting all these things together, and they're not looking at what happens when they do them synergistically. They're not looking at what happens when they do, several on the same day. They're not looking at what happens when they use aborted fetal tissues and all this other stuff. And she's just like, oh. Like to that, I could see like the light bulb going off in her head, because she was like, gosh, thinking like, oh, you're right. We did learn all that stuff in organic chemistry. We did learn how, these things, when they mix, it turns into a different chemical.
Yeah.
At that. And so they don't know what the chemicals they're making are.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they don't know, Alice. They don't. Isn't that shocking?
It is.
She's like, what? They don't know? They don't know?
But yeah, I think we're going to cut to a short break because we want to get James up on our show. Yeah, so we'll take a quick break, and then when we get back, we will be talking to James Corbett. So please stay with us.
Hello, thanks for having me on your radio. Even though we're not from a famous rock and roll band, if we were, even though we sound a little like we are, we'd definitely wear a Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, because they're gear, aren't they? Oh yeah, they're really gear. I want to write a song about them. Conspiracy Realist t-shirts at truthatease.com. I gotta think of the middle eight. Shop.truthatease.com. What does that mean? It's the internet. What's that? I don't know. It's a net. It's between things. Shop.truthatease.com. What's that? It's where you get Conspiracy Realist t-shirts. Oh, gear.
Hi,
Welcome back to Truth or Talk. Thanks for hanging in with us. Today we're talking to James Corbett. James has been living and working in Japan since 2004. He started the Corbett Report website in 2007 as an outlet for independent critical analysis of politics, society, history, and economics. The Corbett Report is an independent, listener-supported alternative news source. It operates on the principle of open source intelligence and provides podcast interviews, articles, and videos about breaking news and important issues, from 9/11 truth and false flag terror to the Big Brother police state, eugenics, geopolitics, the central banking fraud, and much, much more. Please welcome to the show James Corbett. Hi, James. Thank you for being on today.
Yeah, nice to meet you. One of the things we would like to know about you is, like, tell us about your journey to becoming awake, and why did you decide to start your show?
Well, the story starts, I guess, the way I usually tell it, it starts in 2006, and I think there may have been parts of my journey that started before then, kind of planting the seeds, but really in 2006 is when I started to encounter some of the information that really became the research that became the Corbett Report. So I moved into a new apartment here in Japan, and that apartment came with an internet connection, and it was the first time in years that I'd had an internet connection in my home. And in my absence, I'd suddenly discovered all of these new things that were coming up online, like YouTube and Google Video, and things for basically allowing me to explore my interests in documentaries and things like that to my heart's extent. So I started getting into that. I've always been sort of a politically interested person, so I was looking at politically interested videos, I guess you could say, and then I started to encounter in the related videos on YouTube these crazy, wild ideas about 9/11 conspiracy theories and things of that nature, and I clicked on some of them just out of curiosity, and some of them were silly and outrageous and just made me roll my eyes, but others had little facts that I thought were interesting, and this being the internet age, I could actually go and search some of those facts for myself and see if there was anything to them. And once you get started in that process, as I'm sure your audience will know, it's just a rock that's rolling downhill, and it just gathers steam from that point. So ultimately, it was only about 6 to 8 months maybe from that initial encounter with that type of information towards starting the website, and it was really just a spontaneous decision on my part. I knew I had to get this information out to other people, and at first I was thinking about physically handing CDs out to people of podcasts I'd listen to or something of that sort, but then I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm in Japan, so I only have a limited access to English speakers anyway, so I decided, well, it's the internet age, I better start a website, and so I did, and it was originally just going to be a podcast, but very soon I realized, well, I should do articles, I should do videos, I have to do interviews, so it just became what it is, really just sort of spontaneously, and there was no grand plan behind it, and it's far exceeded anything I could have ever imagined when I made that first little step.
Wow, that's so fascinating, because I feel a lot of people, we ask a lot of our guests this question, and a lot of them had some kind of harsh, I don't know, some traumatic event in their life that made them kind of look in and seek this information out. But I'm just fascinated by the fact that you were just very open, to the possibility that maybe...
Yeah, and that's why I say it may have started before 2006, because I think there are little incidents that I can point back to go, oh, maybe that's why I was kind of already receptive to this idea. I had always sort of known, for example, that clearly Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill JFK by himself. That's a ridiculous story. But I never got into JFK assassination research or anything of that sort. I just kind of knew that was a load of hogwash. And things of that nature. I've always been kind of skeptical about things like that, but I've never really done a lot of research into it. But in 2000, earlier in 2006, I was going back to Canada from Japan for a trip to be the best man in my friend's wedding, and passing through customs in Vancouver, I got stopped and pulled aside for extra screening, and I'd never really been through that experience. It was more than I was expecting. Not only did they go through all my bags and take everything out and look at it, but they started doing things like taking the book out of my bag and asking me, oh, do you like this book? And it was really loaded with significance, like this answer to this, and it was just a Chuck Palahniuk novel. It was nothing. I mean, it wasn't some terrorist manual. Exactly, but I mean, it felt like somehow my answer to this question would determine whether or not I'm a terrorist or something like that. It was a really uncomfortable vibe. And then they took out my cell phone, and they were going through the pictures in my cell phone. And it was a brand new cell phone, so I only had 5 or 6 pictures on it. And they're like, well, why do you only have 5 or 6 pictures? And then they were asking me, who is this person? Who is that person? It was so bizarre. And then they got out my diary, my journal, and were flipping through it. And she asked me, can I take a photocopy of this or something like that? And I was flabbergasted. I'm like, I don't know. Can you? I had no idea what my rights were in that situation, what I could or couldn't consent to. I was completely blown away by that whole process. And so I think that obviously shook me up pretty badly. I mean, I'd always had kind of I think everyone has a bit of a dislike of that type of idea of that screening and searching and what have you, but a lot of people can kind of go along with it because, it's the age of terror or whatever. But that when it hits home like that, and you are experiencing that yourself, you really do start to think, well, what are your rights in that situation, and what can these people do, and what kind of legal limbo are you in that? And so that got some of the wheels turning. And another incident that I point back to was when I was, I think, first in Japan. I was watching the biopic of Gandhi, and there's a scene in that where Gandhi is in South Africa, and the Indians are required to carry their identity cards with them as part of the British rule there, and so Gandhi leads a protest of people against this idea of having to carry your identity card everywhere, and gets beaten up for it and thrown in jail and everything. And there I am sitting there watching this movie with my identity card in my pocket, because all foreigners, all residents of Japan have to have an identity card at all times. Yeah. If you're stopped any time by a policeman, they can ask for that identity card. And I was sitting there. Well, I was sitting there thinking, well, why is this so normal to me? Why did I never even question this, let alone, protest it and get beaten up and thrown in jail for it? I mean, we've really undergone some conditioning in the past century to truly transform our ideas of issues like this. And that was another kind of eye-opening incident that at least got me thinking along these lines.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I lived in Taiwan for 2 years teaching English when I stumbled upon your show. You were one of the many shows that April and I watched. It's inspiration for getting our show up and going. And I remember a while back you said you were an English teacher. Are you still an English teacher? And are the Japanese indoctrinated with the same propaganda as the American public?
I was an English teacher from the time I got here in 2004 until 2011, and since 2011 I've been able to do the website full-time thanks to subscribers and donators and people who buy DVDs, so I'm really blessed. I mean, I pinch myself every day because I know that this is a very unusual situation, so I'm trying to make the most of it. But yes, I mean, having worked, I worked at a private school here for the first few years and then in the public school system for 4 years, and yes, I mean, obviously there is propaganda and indoctrination. I'm not sure it's the exact same flavor and type and subject matter as the American version, but there are obviously parallels and points of accord. Mm-hmm. And one that I still remember that really sticks in my mind was when I was teaching in junior high, and the junior high English textbook had this bizarre chapter that was all about, it had these illustrations of characters that had these bizarre, zombified looks on their face, and they're talking about, electric cars or whatever, and they're saying it's good for the earth, it will help the earth, and things like this, and it was so skewed towards a certain type of. I mean, this is the way you learn English, by learning, propaganda buzzwords and things like that. So
totally.
That was a moment, yeah.
No, I've had to
teach that too. That was a moment that I realized.
It's very disturbing, to me too. I noticed that too as a teacher, that I would see propaganda in the subject matter like that too. Have you tried to or thought about translating your shows or articles into Japanese, or do you do that?
My Japanese wouldn't be up to the task. I can get along in everyday situations, but when it comes to specialized vocabulary, talking about international geopolitics, I'm a bit out of my league. I suppose I could get my wife to help me, but she's busy enough helping raise our child and working herself, so I don't think she's interested in that. I do have people who do volunteer from time to time to translate various things I've done, and I'm always, appreciative of that, but I don't have any formal system in place for translation. But I don't know. I mean, we're getting to the point where this automatic translation is at least getting good enough that you can make sense of articles in foreign languages more or less now. So, and I'm sure they're working on the next stage. I'm sure they already have the next stage of whatever AI kind of systems for automatic translation and whatever else they're working on behind the scenes in the skunk works of DARPA and Google and what have you. But that will be unveiled to the public slowly, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. What is your opinion of the consciousness of the people in Japan? Like, how savvy? And I know you have to kind of generalize, but just from your experience, how savvy you think they are when it comes to their perspective on the world and how it works?
It is difficult to say because it is. There are definitely two levels of society here, I guess you can say, and there's even names for it in Japanese. There's honmae and tatemae, and basically that means what you really think, what you really believe, and then what you show to the outside world. I mean, they're two different concepts. And so there are the things that you're allowed to say in polite society and that, people will say and talk about, and then there are the things that you'll talk about at home with your family kind of thing. And so it's very difficult to get a gauge of it unless you're very close friends with someone. It's hard to have an honest and open conversation, although actually it's usually easier in English because if you're with someone who's interacting in English, maybe they feel it's a little bit different than their Japanese interactions. But still, yeah, a lot of Japanese society is kind of closed off in that way, so it's difficult to get a gauge. And one of the ways you can get some sort of finger on the pulse of Japanese society is to look at the type of conversation that happens online in internet forums and things, which is increasingly dominated by this type of reactionary, conservative / imperialistic, war-like kind of rhetoric that's coming into vogue online here. And I'm not sure if that's a genuine expression of real underlying Japanese sentiment or just sort of the nature of the way internet discussions work. But certainly with the new prime minister, or not new anymore, he's been in for 2.5 years now, but Abe, who's really trying to fundamentally change the perception of Japan and its self-perception from a fundamentally peaceful nation, which it likes to think of itself since the end of the Second World War, to one that is now ready to change its constitution and start having an aggressive military again. That's a huge shift to be going through right now, and there's a lot of support for that in online forums and things that you don't see in polite society here. I still think it's a bit of a cultural taboo to be warlike and nationalistic in face-to-face interaction, but there does seem to be that underlying sentiment online. So there may be a bit of honmae and tatemae going on there. But yes, I mean, certainly, I think it's like any country, fundamentally. I mean, there is a mixed bag of people who are open-minded and who can see through the propaganda, and then, of course, a lot of people who do not see through propaganda. And it's just, I think fundamentally, like any other country, it's just got its own cultural permutations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, what's going on with Fukushima? So, is it still leaking? Have they made any attempts to try and fix it? Do you know? From your perspective, I mean, because we get different news, than Japanese news, so I'm just curious, what are they saying about it over there?
Yes, well, the fundamental underlying problem at the site is the melted through cores in reactors 1, 2, and 3, and obviously those haven't been dealt with and cannot be dealt with current technology. In fact, the technology really doesn't exist yet to even be able to get a sense of where those cores are. And they've tried various techniques. Of course, they send a lot of robots into the reactor buildings that invariably will fail because the radiation is too intense. And they've recently tried some sort of it wasn't cosmic rays, but it was something like that to try to image where the reactors are lying, and that was not as successful as they had hoped. So they still don't even really know where the reactors are, and that's the fundamental problem of the whole site. So the leaking is really just kind of the ancillary problem of that. It's the kind of thing that's happening because of that. So you have the groundwater flowing through the site and through the reactor basements that are getting contaminated and then pouring out into the ocean. And so, of course, that continues to go on, and the question of storing that radioactive water continues to be a problem, because not only are the tanks that they're using to store that water leaking, but they're also running out of tanks. So there's that problem. And so now the latest is that they're going to actually start a water decontamination plant in next year. Russia is going to be constructing that through Rosatom Corporation, and I believe that's going to be on site at Fukushima. So they're actually going to have their own water decontamination plant right there on site to deal with that issue. But as I say, I mean, that's only kind of the secondary problem to what is the fundamental problem, which still hasn't and can't really be addressed, which is where the reactors are and how you actually contain that.
Are you guys seeing an increase in disease, thyroid problems, or autoimmune? I've heard a little bit, and I've seen some blogs that people are writing saying that the Japanese government is basically covering up, but there are people getting sick. Have you witnessed that yourself?
I certainly haven't witnessed any sort of abnormal amount of disease or sicknesses in my part of the country, but I don't think that would be expected. I'm several hundred kilometers away from Fukushima at this point. In Fukushima Prefecture and the surrounding area itself, there have been various, there is a screening process in place to screen everyone for thyroid issues, especially children, anyone under 18, because that would be the first sort of round of what we would expect. Using Chernobyl as an example, we would expect a lot of children to start coming down with thyroid cancer within about 5 years of the event. Well, we're now into I guess this is the 4th year. Wow, time really is flying. And so we are expecting to see some sort of increase in thyroid cancer. So that screening program has been in place. And what it has found has been a 6,000% increase in observed cases of thyroid abnormalities, which could be nascent cancer. And so to put that in perspective, 16 new cases were detected between January and March of this year. And that's a striking figure. But then there are the people who will say, well, that's only because there is an unprecedented screening campaign that's underway right now. I mean, everyone under 18 is being screened, and being screened quite vigorously. So all of these cases that would not normally be found, these abnormalities, are being found. So that's the way it's being spun. And I guess you can decide for yourself whether that's a rational explanation or not. But anyway, there is an increase in thyroid abnormalities that are being detected in children right now.
Yeah, it's hard to tell from here because, we just really don't know. I mean, I'm in California. Virstyne just moved away from California. She's in Texas now. But here in California, there's a lot of concern about it, even here, that we're getting fallout. But really nobody kind of knows exactly how much radiation we're actually getting or not. And we have plants in California. We've always had plants here for quite a long time anyway. So who knows if it's Fukushima or if it's just from the ones that we already have existing.
Well, that's an important point that I think needs to be underlined, because the most radioactive site in America, the Hanford site, continues to have leaks and problems. There was a huge problem last year, and let's keep in mind there are a lot of problems with the nuclear industry in the United States that are very similar to the problems that led to Fukushima. So I think this is a very fundamental problem with the nature of the nuclear energy industry itself, and the way it's quote-unquote regulated in the United States by the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, which doesn't regulate anything. Of course, it's just a kind of green rubber stamp for anything the nuclear energy industry wants. And it's run by energy industry insiders and cronies. So, these are fundamental problems that I think need to be addressed, not just in Japan, not just in the United States, but really around the world, because the fundamental thing to keep in mind about radioactive nuclear energy, the way it's been developed, the uranium reactors that are used throughout the world, is it is an adjunct to the nuclear weapons industry. And the types of reactors that are used now are used simply because they are really good at processing the raw materials for nuclear weapons. And that's why you use uranium in reactors, for example, instead of thorium, or much less potentially hazardous or world-threatening types of reactor designs. So I think that's something that's kind of the big elephant in the room that really does need to be addressed throughout the world. And unfortunately, the IAEA isn't going to do it because that really is an adjunct to the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy industries with the explicit goal of promoting nuclear energy use. That's actually what the IAEA's mandate is. So of course they're not going to fundamentally question the industry that they are designed to help promote.
And have you, has this event in any way changed your opinion about whether or not we should use nuclear energy? Because I know a lot of people that consider themselves libertarian, I don't know if you do, but a lot of people who are on the libertarian side kind of say, well, we should be able to do anything that is in the name of the free market, and, certainly nuclear power is one of those things, and we should be able to do it, and, just maybe make it a little safer next time. So how do you feel about using it in general?
Well, there's actually a pretty easy solution to getting rid of nuclear power, which is to get rid of government, or at least government involvement in the nuclear energy industry. The nuclear energy industry is not profitable, would not be possible without the support of government itself. Not only the explicit subsidies that the nuclear energy industry gets, and the backslaps and things like that, but also all of the underlying support that makes it possible, including indemnity, so that they don't have to pay in the event of large disasters and things like that, that it's going to be subsidized by the state, exactly as has happened in Japan, where the Tokyo Electric Power Company that ran the Fukushima plant has effectively been nationalized. The Japanese government effectively took it over and assumed the majority of the stocks. So it's now effectively a nationalized company, and of course now a national problem. So the Japanese taxpayers are the ones who are footing the multi-billion-dollar bill for the decontamination efforts that are going on right now, which to a large extent are decontamination theater, with people in suits going around scrubbing rocks individually to get the radiation off and things like that, and not really having much of an effect at all. But it's certainly a boondoggle for some people who are making the lots and lots and lots of money from this disaster.
And what do you think about Iran's push to have nuclear power, well, we don't know exactly what they're planning to use it for, but what do you think about that?
Well, there's a couple of things to note. One is that I still think there is no such thing as just nuclear power for the sake of nuclear power. I think any country that's really invested in researching nuclear power has the underlying motive of at least being able to use that for nuclear armament purposes, and it might require, changing around some designs and flipping some switches and getting things a little bit different, but at least the sort of underlying infrastructure is there. So I at this point, let's be clear, even the IAEA acknowledges that there is absolutely no indication whatsoever that Iran has ever diverted any nuclear material to a nuclear weapons project in the last 12 years. So that is explicitly not what's happening right now in Iran, but I think that is ultimately one of the reasons why Iran would be developing the nuclear power potential. And I guess the other question to that is, well, is that so wrong in this age of nuclear powers? Why can Pakistan and France and the United States, Israel, and all these other countries have nuclear weapons, but not Iran? I mean, that's just impossible. Well, obviously it's a double standard, and of course the only way to overcome that double standard is to make it a fait accompli and just create a nuclear weapons program. As North Korea learned, suddenly they get a seat at the table because, well, it's just a fact. They're now a nuclear power. So there's that aspect to it. The other interesting aspect of it is, where did Iran's nuclear program come from in the first place? Any guesses? Oh, that's right. It was the United States, yes, under the Atoms for Peace program, which was really a now admitted PSYOP to basically convince the world that nuclear energy is a wonderful thing. So we need to develop these nuclear programs. But it was always a false front for we need to basically familiarize the public with the nuclear idea so that we can make the use of nuclear weapons more palatable to the public. That was the actual thing that they were discussing behind closed doors at the time, and the Atoms for Peace project of sending nuclear, basically research facilities, feeding nuclear research facilities around the world, including in Iran, was part of that propaganda campaign, and that's where the nuclear research center in Iran was, where it came from and how it was founded.
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting bit of history that I didn't think about. I remember as a kid, back in the 80s and such, there were people that were sane vax, and there were all these groups that what were they called? Maybe that wasn't it. But it was something about, there were all these groups that were anti-nuclear power, and then they all kind of just disappeared, that nobody seemed to really be concerned about it anymore, But now it's a bigger picture. There was a whole agenda to kind of take everybody's mind off of it or paint it as a good thing. So, wow, interesting. So,
just on that note, I should say that one of the most startlingly effective places where that propaganda campaign worked was, of course, Japan. The only victims of actual nuclear bombings, it became a huge proponent of nuclear power in the nuclear energy industry, and people ultimately welcomed the nuclear energy industry here with open arms to the point where 52 reactors now sit. Three of them certainly out of commission, but the rest now offline. But still, 52 reactors have been built in Japan, and it's become a part of the fabric of the energy grid here, which is pretty amazing to think of, considering how opposed the Japanese public was to the nuclear idea in the 1940s and 50s. Obviously, and getting it turned around. And when you look into that history, it was CIA plants in the Japanese media who were writing editorials and basically encouraging the public. And it was also part of the Atoms for Peace program, and they did this, wonderful, nuclear energy, it's a wonderful thing, and they did this whole traveling museum exhibit thing throughout Japan that basically got people on board with the nuclear energy idea. So even in the only country to be traumatized by the scar of actual nuclear bombings, it was in fact one of the first foreign countries to really embrace the whole nuclear energy idea.
Wow. Yeah, that's really crazy and quite ironic. I had read about a year ago or something about Monsanto building crops in Vietnam, and I thought, whoa, that's like a lot of nerve. It's just reminds me of that, you can spray them with Agent Orange and then come back later and say we're gonna make you food or whatever it is they make. But just to switch gears a little bit, I want to get into your last documentary, The Century of Enslavement: The History of the Federal Reserve, and which is about the modern monetary system here in the U.S. So let's start with a very simple question, but I don't know that many people actually know the answer to this. What is money?
Very, very good question. And I think in our popular understanding of that word, it has been conflated to mean a number of different things. And I think we have to tease those different things out. I mean, when you talk about money, are you talking about physical pieces of paper? I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of money. Or are you talking about currency? Are you talking about the idea of a store of value? I think the best way to think of it is to think there are three different functions of money. One is a store of value, one is a medium of exchange, and one is a unit of account. And it just so happens that at this age where we now are in the United States and most other countries around the world, all three are generally the same thing, and it's generally a national currency that's generally created by some sort of central banking institution. So, and kind of farmed out to the commercial banks in the country, exactly as in the United States Federal Reserve example. So the dollar is your store of value, the dollar is your medium of exchange, the dollar is your unit of account. For most people, that's the way they think of it. They don't even think to differentiate those different things. But it leads to some problems, shall we say. So for example, if the dollar is the unit of account, so we measure things in dollars, but the value of the dollar itself changes because it's being either the money supply is expanding or it's contracting, credit is available or it isn't, it's a liquid economy or it isn't. And that affects the value of those dollars, but things are valued in dollars. So you have this bizarre situation of not really being able to fundamentally measure the actual worth of what you're earning or what you're spending because it's in this thing that itself is subject to the market forces that you are trying to measure. So it creates those types of problems, but more fundamentally, of course, when you have the store of value also being the medium of exchange and also subject to those market forces and being manipulated by a central banking system that's expanding or contracting the money supply as the banksters wish, then you run into the problem that a lot of people, unfortunately, are facing right now in the United States, and more so every day, which is saving and your whole life and planning for a retirement, and then suddenly finding that by the time you get there, you've saved up X amount of dollars, which sounded like a lot when back in the 1960s or whenever you started saving. Suddenly, now it's almost nothing. It's pittance because of the inflation. And, of course, the dollar has lost 94%, 95, probably more than that at this point, of its value since the Federal Reserve came into place in 1913. And that means that, well, what do? You have to invest in high-return things because if you're just storing your money in dollars and just parking it in a bank account, you're not going to be able to retire, so you have to invest in the stock market. And of course, that's how they get to inflate the Dow Jones and the S&P to all-time record highs, even when there's absolutely no underlying economic activity that would explain that. So it is all a big Ponzi scheme, and there are a number of different players and a number of different ways that this benefits those players, but fundamentally it's being directed by this very same banksters who brought the Federal Reserve System into place in 1913.
And that leads us to my next question, because I was going to ask you. You interviewed G. Edward Griffin, who the author of the book Creature from the Jekyll Island and the film, and he talked about the secret meeting at Jekyll Island and that it was under the guise of duck hunting, but it was actually these elite group of bankers who wanted to create the Federal Reserve. So what happened exactly, or what do we know that happened, and why would they expose their agenda? How did we come to find out about it?
Well, it was November 22nd, 1910, which is interesting because it's 53 years to the day before the President of the United States had his head blown off in broad daylight by a lone nut. And so a collection of interesting people met at a railroad station in Hoboken, New Jersey. You had Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was very well known as the quote-unquote general manager of the nation, was how he was often referred to in the press at the time, because he was the head of the Senate Finance Committee, a very influential member of the Senate Finance Committee. And he was also, of course, tied into the Rockefeller family. He was the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr. So there's those connections and all of those types of connections. So Senator Nelson Aldrich was kind of the linchpin of this, but then he was joined by the Assistant Treasury Secretary at the time, Frank Vanderlip. You had the President of National Citibank, Henry P. Davison, who was also senior partner of J.P. Morgan. You had Benjamin Strong, who was also an associate of J.P. Morgan and the President of Bankers Trust. You had Paul Warburg of the infamous Warburg banking family, based in Europe, obviously. And he was also the son-in-law of Solomon Loeb of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. So you had these extremely influential banking interests all meeting in one railroad car in Hoboken to take the trip down to Jekyll Island. And in most other circumstances, the press would have been all over that, but especially at that time, because there had been a big crash in 1907, the Panic of 1907, which threatened to bring down Wall Street and the banking system of the United States at that time altogether. And so there was this huge debate that was going on in the United States at that time about, well, do we need a central bank, and how should that central bank be formed? And so these people were actually very much in the spotlight at the time. So the idea of these people meeting together in secret would have been the story of the century if anyone had known about it, but they went to unusual degrees of to basically keep this meeting under wraps. So they They only went by first names the entirety of the trip, so that even their butlers and whatever wouldn't know who they were or what they were doing. And they of course they met in secret, and they had their curtains closed on their private railroad car as they traveled to Jekyll Island, and all of this, ridiculous secrecy, which worked stunning well, because it wasn't until I want to say 23 years later that it was finally 100% confirmed by Frank Vanderlip, who you remember was the Assistant Treasury Secretary. He actually wrote about it in the Saturday Evening Post, I believe it was, in 1933, where he I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. So you have the confession in his own words by one of the conspirators. Sorry, it wasn't 33, it was 35 years later. It was the February 1935 edition of the Saturday Evening Post. Although it had been reported on, interestingly enough, by Charles Forbes, Bertie Charles Forbes in 1916, who would, of course, go on to found Forbes magazine, but that was never fully confirmed until 1935, but it eventually was, 25 years later, when no one particularly cared or was interested in the story anymore. It was finally confirmed. So another conspiracy theory I'm sure people would have been derided for at the time that was fully confirmed by one of the conspirators.
Wow. Yeah, but why do you think he did that? Why did he want to let everybody know about it? And write the piece in the Post and all that?
That's a good question. It could simply be hubris, and I think that a lot of the people who are involved in these types of things want to brag about their involvement in them, because it's a sign of their importance, and it makes a good story. And at that time, by the time that it was actually admitted, it wasn't a political deal. I mean, no one at the time was talking about, well, there were a few people in Congress actually talking about ending the Federal Reserve, but not many, and it wasn't a political issue that most people in the nation were even really aware of at the time, let alone thinking about, doing something about. So I think, obviously, if they had talked about it in 1910, it would have completely and utterly destroyed any chances of them enacting the legislation. If they had talked about it even a few years after the creation, people would have been probably very angry about it. But it's one of those things that one could imagine, 30, 40, 50 years from now, or however long it is, one could imagine some political reality where they come out and say, yeah, you know what, it looks like there may have been some CIA involvement in JFK or something like that. And by that point, I mean, what are people going to do? It's like, oh, well, I think I remember my grandpa talking about that, when I was a kid, but he was only talking about what his grandpa had told him. So there comes a certain political distance from these things where it's okay to talk about them and to reveal what's going on. And again, I think people get a sort of sick thrill out of being part of that. I mean, hey, I'm a conspirator. I helped bring about this system. It makes quite a story. Yeah,
it's right. It does. Makes him feel omnipotent, like he was a part of this whole thing, even if it's not necessarily, even if it's maybe evil, on that side of the end. But that's a good point that you bring up, too, about the distance thing, because you think sometimes when we see these things happen in history, people are aware of false flags throughout history. They're aware of assassinations throughout history. They're aware of, CIA doing dubious things throughout history. And yet, when you try to say, well, this is happening now, people will say, no, that was then. It's not now. That was then. That's kind of an interesting thing that you bring up, because there does seem to be this disconnect that happens where people can kind of think it's not a big deal that it happened in the past, but it's a big deal that it happens now. But then that sort of helps. I don't know. Then they don't really see it happening in the present. Kind of interesting. But since the financial crisis of 2008, there were the Baker's bailouts, and there's been some films come out. There was Inside Job with Matt Damon, and there seem to be some people kind of waking up to things that are going on in this Ponzi scheme. And one of the things you discussed was alternatives to the Federal Reserve monetary system, and like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and all of that. So what can you tell us about that, and are you still involved with that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that the only way that we're ever going to fundamentally change the system as it exists is not going to be through some sort of political action. I really don't believe that's going to change anything. I think it's going to come from grassroots efforts to construct an alternative system. And the point that I tried to make at the end of the documentary, it's split into 3 parts, and the first part is kind of about the history of the Federal Reserve and how it came about. The second part is how it functions, what it actually does, and then the third part is talking about these alternatives and what can be done about it. And the point of that third section wasn't to advocate any one particular idea. It was just to show there are a lot of different ideas on the table, and I think we need to at least start the discussion and educate ourselves about what those alternatives are. So I talked, for example, to Ellen Brown about the idea of public banking. I talked about, as you say, gold and Bitcoin and things of that sort that have often been proposed as sound money, or gold has been proposed as a sound money alternative. And there are other ideas like alternative and complementary currencies as ways of at least starting the baby steps of getting away from that dollar hegemony. And I think that's extremely important in the light of things like what we've seen in Greece, where you have the Greek people who are the same people as they were a few years ago and largely engaged in the same tasks, producing the same things and interacting in the same way and buying the same things from each other, but they can't do so because of a lack of this currency, this euro that the European Central Bank, basically makes possible. That's ridiculous. That's insane. Why are these people being prevented from their interactions and their transactions because of a lack of this currency that has been deemed as the legal tender? So you have seen in Greece in the last several years a number of experiments and things popping up with alternative currencies based on Let's type programs, on barter even. There's a lot of different alternatives that have been popping up in Greece, and no, they're not all perfectly successful, but to the extent that they are or they aren't generally depends on the amount of engagement and commitment of the people who are using them. So when you're in the midst of a big crisis, it would be really good to have some of these alternatives in place so that you can turn to them in that time of crisis, rather than relying on, the banksters to rain down some paper dollars from heaven on you when it may not be in their interest to do so. And it's a good thing to note that there are already a lot of alternative and community currencies all throughout the United States and around the world. And one example that I highlight in particular is the Ithaca Hours system, an exceptionally successful, probably one of the most successful alternative or community currencies in the world, that was started a few decades ago, or a couple of decades ago, and is extremely well used in Ithaca. You can not only buy all sorts of local services and retail goods, but you can also go to the hospital. There's credit unions that accept this complementary currency. So it's quite already a valid and viable system. But again, the more people who participate in it, the more likely it is to be something that people can turn to in the event of a crisis, like what we saw in 2008 or whatever is going to come with the popping of the next bubble.
Right, which is probably going to happen, or most certainly going to, the way that the price of oil and everything is going up and up and up. And so were you ever following the stories coming out of Iceland about the story was that there was this debt forgiveness and then all the people were suddenly free, and I think it was kind of idealized maybe a little bit, and we didn't necessarily hear the full story. Were you following that at all?
Yes, not as much as I should be. I mean, I can't speak of it with a great deal of authority, but I can absolutely say that the sort of simplistic notion that's sort of put out there sometimes that Iceland did it right, they put the banksters in jail and forgave all debts and it turned out better. I think that's disingenuous in a lot of different ways. I mean, first of all, it's not really a direct analogy to what's going on, for example, in Greece, where in the Icelandic situation, it was you had British banks that were coming in and helping to facilitate all sorts of loans that eventually got basically the Icelandic banks were overinvested in these CDOs and things that were coming out of the United States that we now know were the subprime toxic garbage, and so they ended up getting in trouble, and this put their outstanding loans in jeopardy. blah, blah, blah. And so ultimately they said they weren't going to pay back the British banks, and ultimately the Icelandic Parliament went along with them on that. And then there have been things like certain people have been allowed to get out of mortgage debt and things like that because of, loans that were, I can't think of the word, predatory. But it doesn't apply to everyone. And so there's a lot of caveats to that story. And yes, there have been some bankers that have been thrown in jail. So there are, I think, positive aspects to that. And it does deserve to be looked at as an example, but I don't think it's something that can be directly applied or immediately applied to places like Greece or other places. But it can be at least something that we can sort of study as one way forward, or something that can be done. But I think that ultimately the idea of debt forgiveness, that has to be the fundamental underlying idea for a place like Greece, which of course was sold down the river by its political caste, whatever you want to call them, in conjunction with the banksters, because now we know absolutely 100% for certain Goldman Sachs helped Greece cook its books in order to get it in the Eurozone in the first place. Greece should not even be in the Eurozone by the Eurozone's own standards, but they did some magic on the books, and suddenly it looked like they were in a lot better financial health than they were. We all know that's a complete lie. We all know that the Greek government has been the one that's been running up this bill that now the average Greek person is being asked to pay. It is an odious debt. It is ridiculous. It is illegal. And in fact, there was a parliamentary committee in Greece that was looking into this very issue that came out with this really startling preliminary report talking about how the debt is odious, it's illegal, it's against is a human rights violation to put the Greek people on the line for this debt that was run up by fraudulent and predatory banks, including the ECB and the IMF and the European Stabilization Fund. It was really an amazing report, but of course, absolutely none of that got into the negotiations with the so-called Troika between Greece and its creditors. None of that was really brought up. They never really brought up that issue or talked about the idea that this debt itself is illegal and fraudulent and should not be foisted on the average Greek citizens. But of course, that's never going to be brought up in the political game that's being played right now. And it is a political game. And that's again why I think the real solution is going to come grassroots. It's going to come from alternative infrastructures that are either participated in and built up by the people, or the people will ignore them and continue going along their merry way and will suffer the consequences when the collapse really hits home.
I'm just curious, what is the official narrative of global warming or climate change, and why people held on to this, even in the light of the 2009 ClimateGate discoveries?
It's just a question of who basically controls the propaganda narrative, and it's not hard to see who really does have a large amount of control over that. It's the types of, it's an institutional narrative that's being painted on the climate change front, and that's one that's undergirded by this supposed consensus, quote unquote, which itself is an ephemera. The more you look into it, the more even the claims of 97% of scientists or 97% of research papers or whatever 97% number they're going to pull out of their hat next week is itself a fraud. And if you look into the story, for example, the original story about the 97% of scientists agree was based on a poll of something of the order of 13,000 scientists, and ultimately only a small percentage of that even replied to the survey, and of that there was only, I think, something like 93 or something that were actual climate scientists. So they took whatever it was, 91 of the 93 or whatever the number was, and said, well, look, that's 97%, so it's a 97% number, which, with so many levels of fraudulent dissembling going on there. And then, in order to save that 97% number, they came out with this new study that took a look at tens of thousands of peer-reviewed papers and found that 97% of them agreed that man-made global warming was happening. And that story has completely fallen apart because other people have picked it apart, not only from the fact that the ways that these papers were being counted were highly questionable. In fact, a lot of the authors of some of these papers have been contacted and said that's not what this paper is about. That's not what we were saying. We don't stand by that. So not only that type of problem, but also if you actually look at the papers that explicitly actually state that anthropogenic global warming is the cause of what we're seeing, it's something like 0.7% or some ridiculously small number like that. It's just that they get to manipulate the interpretation of what these papers are saying that allows them to say 97%. So, I mean, and they also are keeping the actual data that they used, that they collected on these papers and how they sorted them. They're keeping that secret because, of course, you know, I mean, any process like this is going to be secretive. But, of course, the only thing that gets published in the media is 97% of scientists agree, and you have with a Colbert or one of those funny comedian, political comedian people having that debate about climate science where they got 97 guys dressed up in lab coats up on the stage versus 3 oil-funded shills to, you know, talk about climate change or whatever. And it makes a great spectacle, and it certainly implants the idea in people's minds, oh, there's a consensus. And therefore it's true, which even in and of itself is a fallacy. But again, I think it's so much about this media perception. Another excellent example of this just happened very recently with Jim Hansen, who, of course, was one of the people who helped kick off this global warming hysteria back in the 80s through admitted fraud and deception. It's interesting if people look into the actual original hearings and some of the ridiculous tricks they played, like turning off the air conditioning in the room in Washington during a heat wave so that people were literally sweating while they were delivering their testimony about this global warming. That was admitted to years ago by people who did it. Yeah. But, you know, silly little tricks like that have a huge effect on the way people perceive things because it's all about perception. But Jim Hansen has basically shifted completely from being a scientist to being an activist, an advocate, and doesn't really even make bones about that anymore. And he recently came out with this paper that's talking about, no, you know, the IPCC just came out talking about the sort of equivocal, maybe there might be a little bit of this type of sea level rise, but no, it's actually going to be so much more. And interestingly, not even the sort of climate change true believers took that very seriously. Basically, he put out a press release about this paper that hasn't been reviewed, and no one's, you know, there's nothing behind it, nothing to it. It's been put out now for an open review, and even in the first couple of days of review, there were dozens of comments from different scientists that were just eviscerating this study that supposedly shows that it's much worse than we thought. But again, of course, the only things that ever get reported are it's much worse than we thought, because hey, that's an amazing headline. That'll sell newspapers, that'll sell advertising for your TV network. But you know what? Actually, things aren't quite as bad as we thought, is not as sexy a story, and is not going to be run with. And that's even just looking at it from a sort of, you know, dollars and cents perspective, let alone from a, you know, who's really pulling the strings of this agenda perspective.
It seems that the real problem is the government allowing the EPA and things, all these pollutants getting into our environment. Maybe they should focus on that, right? But that's not probably going to happen.
Absolutely. No, there are real, true environmental disasters that are taking place as we speak. All sorts of, I mean, real pollution problems and things of that nature. And let's not even, I mean, how can you even talk about that without broaching the subject of the giant uncontrolled experiment with the genome of the planet itself that's being run by Monsanto and its various biotech brethren, that is truly threatening to change the entire planet and the future of the entire world. I mean, you can't overstate how important what's happening right now is in this giant open-air, uncontrolled experiment that's going on. But no, let's not talk about those issues. Let's concentrate on carbon dioxide and how your SUV is basically causing everything wrong in the world, and we have to sacrifice to the carbon gods to atone for our sins.
Yeah, it's like everything that they create, they always want to put back on us, you know, like your problem, you're a genetic mutant, or you have these issues, and so on and so forth. It's your car, it's your breathing, it's whatever, you know, but it's like, no, you guys are doing it, you know, yeah. But, and some people in the alternative media and the truth movement, they get into the idea that maybe there is global warming, but it's coming from HAARP, or it's coming from chemtrails, or it's these types of things. Have you looked into that, or have you seen anything that might be able to cite that as a possibility?
Weather manipulation and at least the quest for weather control is not a conspiracy. I mean, that's openly admitted and is even talked about in UN treaties and things of that nature. I mean, it's certainly going on, and I have no doubt that it's much more advanced from where it was back in Vietnam, where you had people involved in the program openly bragging that they could cause, typhoons to wipe out the North Vietnamese supply lines whenever they wanted, and that type of thing. I'm sure we are at absolute Buck Rogers level by this point in terms of all the Black Op underground programs that I'm sure they have on the books. But again, that's one of those things that, I mean, we can only ever come back into that from the outside. And again, geoengineering is something that is going on and is being worked on. The only question is the extent to which it's currently being used and what is the components that they're using in their geoengineering mix and all of that. But yes, these things are going on, and I have no doubt that they can explain some of these weather phenomenon that we're seeing. But on the bigger picture of global warming itself, I mean, you have, I guess it's all about the scale that you're looking at. If you look at the last 20 years, there hasn't statistically been warming, in fact. And that pause has been now admitted by even the climate change true believers. So that's a pretty sticky position to be in, but they keep changing the goalposts. Before it was like, well, if you have 20 years of no warming, that would be something. And now that it's 20 years, they're saying, well, if you have 50 years, maybe that'll be something. So, of course, the goalposts just continue to change. But if you expand out even from there, of course, the world generally is warming because we're still coming out of the mini ice age that took place a few hundred years ago. And, of course, bigger picture than that, we're in an interglacial period where you would expect warming before, of course, the next glacial period where we'll be cooling. I mean, it's all about the perspective of how many years you're looking at. And, of course, that's why when they're looking at global warming statistics, generally they'll look at periods that suit their purposes, generally starting in the 1970s, because that's when this latest period of warming took place, but from the 1970s to the late 1990s. And so that's what makes all of these, graphs look really spectacular. But it's all about perception and framing. And again, I mean, if people perceive that the weather is changing, they will see the changes, because what does it mean for weather to be the same? I mean, is the weather always going to be the same all the time? Of course not. There are going to be unusual weather events all the time. Whether or not those unusual weather events are increasing or decreasing is a matter that has to be studied. It's not one that can be perceived, because we are just perceiving the day-to-day weather.
Yeah, it's true. We used to just call it the seasons. Now it's like this, it's global warming or
it's hot this summer. Oh my God!
Right, it's hot. It's we're having a drought in California. Well, yeah, because we're in the desert. It's like it doesn't rain. It doesn't rain very much because it's desert around here. So, well, thank you for being on the show today. We're just about out of time, but we've had a really good chat with you, and I'm really honored that you've been on our show. As Virstyne was saying at the beginning, I don't know, we kind of glided past that, but you were one of the people that we were watching when we were first starting to talk about this radio program, and inspired us to do it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. My hats are off to everyone who gets into this conversation and gets in the ring and starts putting this information out. Whether they agree with me or not, or what their perspectives are, I really do think that the only way forward is for humanity to start engaging in this conversation rather than just passively watching it from the sidelines. So absolutely my hats off to you guys for getting involved.
Oh, well, thank you. Very well said.
Yeah.
And before we go, please remind our audience where your website is and how they can buy your DVDs, follow you on YouTube, all that.
I'm at CorbettReport.com. That's where you can find my audio and video and articles, all of the information there. It's all up freely available. I have a subscriber newsletter that comes out on the weekends, but that editorial is available on the International Forecaster website at theinternationalforecaster.com. YouTube.com/CorbettReport is my YouTube channel, and basically all the links will be there at CorbettReport.com. And all the information, again, freely available up there for free. Use it as a resource if you like it, and if you're a follower of mine and you've been watching for some time and you appreciate the information, then of course I do appreciate donations, subscriptions, DVD sales.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of your, I don't know what time it is over there, but enjoy the rest of your
11
day.
a.m. The day's still young for me.
Okay, the day is young, so enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, James.
Right.
Everything I'm looking at seems crazy. The newspaper, the television, nothing's right. Nothing's telling me what's true. It's like I fell into a bucket of cream and kicked my legs until I became a mouse. What's that about? I'm a conspiracy realist, not a conspiracy theorist. I want a t-shirt that represents me. What? There's one that's available? Go to shop.truthertease.com, says the voice in my head. Shop.truthertease.com. It's not crazy. I'm not afraid to go on the internet and go to shop.truthertease.com. I'm not scared. I've taken out bowling balls that look like you. That's what I said. Straighten out. Get your conspiracy realist t-shirt. Don't make me come over there. You look good. You look good.
The first person to stand against any great evil is always the most courageous. To be the first one to call out any great injustice is to invite ridicule, scorn, even persecution. It's difficult to imagine today just how brave were the first slave owners to call for the abolition of slavery, the first men and women to advocate women's suffrage, the first activists to call for the end of apartheid. In the end, their cause is recognized as just, and these brave souls are lauded, often posthumously, as heroes. But in the beginning, no one wants to admit that they are a party, even unwittingly, to a great evil. The wildest injustices can be legitimized simply because they are popular. Today, just such a popular injustice exists. It has been infused into our culture and taken up as a cause. It is fervently believed in and advocated with great passion and force, and to speak out against it is to risk persecution and scorn. But speak out against it we must. The terrible injustice of our age has its roots in a most unlikely place, in the quaint villages and manicured gardens of the 19th century British gentry. Amongst that set lived one Francis Galton, a gentleman scientist who had investigated everything from meteorology to statistics. Shortly after his cousin, Charles Darwin, published his Origin of Species, Galton became fascinated with the idea that the survival of the fittest did not just take place between species, but within them. This idea became a pseudoscience, a study of the presumed racial characteristics of this group or that group, with an aim to explaining why the various peoples of the world occupy the positions that they do. In order to confirm their preconceived notions of their own self-worth, Galton and his friends started a new field of inquiry called eugenics. Unsurprisingly, it concluded that the rich and powerful were rich and powerful because they were genetically superior, and it offered a simple solution for improving the lot of humanity. Make sure that the affluent upper classes breed as much as possible, preferably within their own families, in order to preserve their superior stock. And make sure the lower classes breed as little as possible. This junk science, pandering as it did to the most rabid, the most racist, the most elitist interests of the moneyed class, became universally accepted in the Western world within a generation. Soon, country after country had implemented laws to allow the government to sterilize those citizens it deemed to be unfit. The true horrors of this strain of thought came to light when the German eugenicists, based at the Rockefeller-funded Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, gave the Nazi regime an ideological excuse to take the idea to its logical conclusion. Many of the Germans who went along with the Holocaust did so because they genuinely believed the scientists who were telling them that the Jews and Gypsies, the communists and homosexuals, were genetically inferior and needed to be eliminated from the gene pool. After World War II, when the full magnitude of the slaughter that had taken place in the name of eugenics began to become apparent, the eugenicist pseudoscientists scrambled to find a way to re-legitimize their racist and classist drivel. They wrote openly in the journals of their once-esteemed eugenics societies that they would now have to continue their studies and practices in a more covert fashion. Eugenics had to become crypto-eugenics. This was accomplished in a number of ways. The British Eugenics Society, for one, merely changed its name to the Galton Institute. The American Eugenics Society morphed into the Population Council, a group set up by John D. Rockefeller III, where members continued to advocate the very same policies for reducing the population of third world countries as they always had. Only now they did so in the name of fighting overpopulation rather than fighting bad genes. Julian Huxley, brother of the famous writer, helped organize UNESCO in 1945. In the founding document of UNESCO entitled UNESCO, Its Philosophy and Its Purpose, he argues that one of the key aims of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization would be the re-legitimization of eugenics, so that the idea would once again become thinkable. He also went on to co-found the World Wildlife Fund with Nazi SS officer Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Within a generation, science was once again ready to tell us why the only way to save humanity was to stop people from breeding. This time, the public was whipped into a furor not about Jews and gypsies, but about carbon dioxide and environmental sustainability. The cover had changed, but the racist eugenicist text remained the same. In the logic of the eugenicists, the meaning of human life is itself transformed. Instead of something valuable, something precious, something to be desired and nurtured, fought for and celebrated, humanity is reimagined as a cancer, something inherently evil, the mere existence of which is a burden on the world. This, unsurprisingly, encapsulates the modern environmental movement's position almost perfectly. Human life is no longer something to be treasured, but something to be measured in carbon and then reduced. In the man-made global warming myth, humans are merely an obstacle to the proper functioning of nature. In the eugenicist fantasy, the Earth is saved when people die. In both ideologies, if they really are separate, the ultimate genocide becomes thinkable. Now, the leaders of the world are meeting in Copenhagen to decide on the future of your world, of my world, of the world of our children and grandchildren. They are proposing a reorganization of the world's economy. Punishing austerity is being urged in all corners. Groups of population control eugenicists are now arguing for carbon offsets to be used to stop the developing world from having children. The choir of madness is growing by the day, and everything seems set to reach an intolerable crescendo. And then, in the darkest hour, just as it seems the eugenicists are about to take over, along comes an insider, a hero, at the University of East Anglia, to leak the emails and documents with which the entire man-made global warming myth is exposed and the carbon reduction agenda is delegitimized. It is not always popular to stand against a great injustice, but it is always right. For the Corbett Report, I am James Corbett in Western Japan.
Hello, thanks for having me on your radio. Even though we're not from a famous rock and roll band, if we were, even though we sound a little like we are, we'd definitely wear a Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, because they're gear, aren't they? Oh yeah, they're really gear. I want to write a song about them. Conspiracy Realist t-shirts at truthatees.com. I gotta think of the middle eight. Shop.truthatees.com. What does that mean? It's the internet. What's that? I don't know. It's a net. It's between things. Shop.truthatees.com. What's that? It's where you get Conspiracy Realist t-shirts. Oh, gear.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for listening to Truth or Talk. So, hey, Virstyne, we just interviewed James Corbett.
I know. That was a delight. He was a delight.
Wasn't he? I know. He was a really nice guy. Really, really, really nice. And exactly what I expected. You know, it's always if you've ever met people who you are in the public eye, or celebrities or whatnot, and sometimes it's a disappointment. You meet them in person, you think, they're okay.
Yeah.
But he was exactly who I expected him to be. He was just really friendly and nice and gracious and humble and just brilliant mind. Just so smart. I don't know what he doesn't know. I'd like to know. I'm sure there are things he doesn't know, but man, he sure seems to know a lot.
Yeah, I wish he can translate his stuff into Japanese.
Yeah.
It would be a huge effort, but if he'd have to find somebody that's just as passionate as he is, that speaks Japanese that would do that, because it's a lot of work. But I don't know, I wonder if, other people in other countries are getting this information as well. That's all, that's a huge concern of mine. Because in order for this planet to thrive and survive, then, we're going to have to have a lot, this information that affects everybody, it can empower us, so.
Yeah, indeed. And when we interviewed Fritz Springmeier, and he seemed to be very, he seemed to think that the Japanese were kind of more awake and alert than the Americans. But James Corbett didn't really seem to see it that way. So I'm not sure. They must have just had very different perspectives somehow, because perhaps Fritz Springmeier is being only approached by the people who read his book and the people who are open to that information, whereas James lives there all the time, and so he's seeing the whole,
definitely.
Culture versus just the isolated culture that you would see if you were there promoting a book, or you were there because certain people invited you, and then so he seemed to get the impression, Fritz Springmeier, that Japan was very awake and alert, and he's a very worldly man. He's been all over traveling and whatnot, but living there is a different thing, if you've been there for a while. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. I can see that.
Yeah, for sure. So James has got a different perspective, and but you're right, it's unfortunate when this information can't get out to everybody, but I mean, it was just a great pleasure to have him on our show, and we said in the intro, he's one of our inspirations, and we made sure to tell him that as well, as to let him know that he's doing good work, that he's inspiring other people to want to do the same. And during the break, we played an excerpt from one of his talks on the 19th century eugenics repackaged as global warming, it's called. You can find that on YouTube. But I thought that was a really good little snapshot of, he summarized all that information pretty well.
He'll probably be, if you ever attempted to write a novel, I think he'd be a really, really good writer. I love the way he's so articulate, and I love his word choices, and he's made me more passionate about looking words up, because honestly, he would say a lot of words, and I'd be like, oh, either I didn't know the word, or I've heard the word used before, and I think I know how to use it, but I'm not sure, so I'll look it up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great.
Indeed, it was a good interview, and it was good timing to have him, and talking about, of course, what's going on over there in Japan with Fukushima. And he's not very close to Fukushima, as he said. He's not finding it locally to be a huge health concern. I've read certain people's blogs and things like that are saying that Fukushima has caused all kinds of cancers and thyroid issues, and the government's basically covering it up, or just pushing it under the rug. And they're not giving people tests for thyroid condition, or they're giving them faulty tests, saying that they're giving them tests that come up with as if there's no problems, but then there are. And so then when they go and get it redone independently, they find the results are different. So I've seen some of that going on. These are people's accounts, blogs, but we don't know. We're not there. We don't know what's going on exactly, but it's certainly a concern all over, and a concern anywhere in the Pacific Ocean, or near the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, it's
and he seemed to really be up on that information. Like he is on everything now. That's what I'm saying. He's just such a brilliant mind to pick, and some good person to have on our show, and just go, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, and then he'll say, well, I'm not really an expert, but then I'm a bigger expert than anybody else. You're like, oh, what? You're not an expert? Okay. Could have fooled me. Yeah. He's definitely really good. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on. So that's certainly something. And my son is very interested in Japan. I didn't bring it up to him. I just slipped my mind. I thought to bring that up to him because my oldest son Avery wants to go to Japan and learn Japanese. When he's 12, he's too young to go overseas right now and do an exchange program. But in the future, when he gets a little older, if he maintains this level of interest, that's something he said he'd like to do. So
yeah,
so I was kind of curious about that as well as how just what it's like and what the what the feeling is as far as the social, the culture and the climate on these issues and stuff. And I'm really fond of just the culture over there, because since my son is interested in his homeschooling last year, we took on that subject as his social studies. So we learned about the culture for his social studies requirement, and it was really fun. I really liked doing that. We would go down to the Japantown and we'd go shopping, and then we'd go to the bookstore and we'd watched films and watched documentaries about how they prepare their food, and I found it really fascinating. And really, I actually have a book that's waiting for me at the library. I haven't picked it up yet. It's called Japanese Women Don't Get Fat and Old.
They don't, and they're like, yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they do, but they don't. You know what I mean? They age gracefully and in a healthy way. And I think it has a lot to do with their culture. Also, they respect old people more. They haven't lost that respect.
Yeah, and it's really, really fascinating, and I would be curious to know about that. They actually have an enzyme that they produce in their stomach that we don't produce, that it helps to break down carbohydrates. So it could be, because a lot of people say, well, we can't tolerate carbohydrates and they're so bad and this and that, but the Japanese people seem to eat them. Well, part of that might be due to they actually have the ability to do that better than we do, but or most other cultures do. I don't know everybody, but I mean, but they do have that extra capacity. Plus, we were watching the documentaries on how they prepare their food, they take so much time and care. I mean, at least the traditional way to do it is a lot of time and care.
Yeah.
I think it's been modernized and corrupted, just like everything else.
Yeah.
We're going to get fast food, sushi out. They showed we watched this documentary about the evolution of sushi, and it starts off they're talking about how basically, I mean, people who go in to become a sushi chef, they will learn they'll spend 2 years just on how to prepare rice, and they do it very slowly, and they have to soak it, and they have to do all these things to make it very just to get the perfect rice. And you're like, wow, that's a lot of work into rice. I mean, you just put it on a stove with some water, right?
Yeah. I'm like, 2 years, that's too damn long to wait to eat some rice.
No doubt, right? And then they have to spend another, it's basically like they spend as much time to become a sushi chef as you would to become a doctor. I mean, they spend 8 years apprenticing before they can actually even apply for a job. That's just their schooling. And then once they apply for a job, they usually have to work underneath somebody for a while. And this is how real sushi chefs work, and how but at this point in time, of course, some Americans came along and started making it into these little fast food tubes that you can get out of a vending machine, which sounds disgusting. But, because I don't know how you would preserve sushi in a tube in a vending machine, and have it not go bad on you. It sounds gross. So there must be some chemicals that they use to keep it from going rotten. Yeah. But anyway, so that's where it's at now. And then, of course, they're talking about the overuse of it and how basically it's become such a huge global thing where now the fish, a lot of the populations of the fish are going extinct, and there's a shortage of, and so, I mean, just over the top and taking it over, and it's no longer the beautiful art form that it once was. So it's unfortunate, but there's a really good documentary called Hero Dream of Sushi. My son and I watched last year.
So that was it. I was going to ask you if that was Hero Dreams of Sushi. Sushi.
Well, there's two documentaries. The one I was talking about that goes into all the correct how it's changed. That was something else, but I also saw that on Netflix, but I can't remember the name of it.
No, but the sushi documentary. That's what you're talking.
There's two sushi documentaries.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Okay.
Yeah. There's two of them. There's the first one I was talking about is not Hirojima Sushi. It's a different one. I can't remember what it was called, but I think it's on Netflix, and so you can just go look it up. And that one is where they get into the evolution of it and the the corruption and how they're depleting the fish populations and all that. The Hirojima Sushi, that's a different one. That one's just, that you're going to get really, really hungry watching this guy. This guy, he's got, I think he's in his 80s, and he's still making sushi, and he hasn't retired yet, and he has two sons, and they're both chefs, and it's like, he's still just going at it, and he's got this work ethic that, he'll just never stop until he's gotten it to the level of perfection. It's just incredible. But it's really inspiring.
And his restaurant it's one of the most expensive restaurants, I think, in the world, or in Japan. And but it's in like a train station. You know what I mean? But people just go because it's so good, I guess.
It's so amazing, and his food is, and they spend a lot of money. Like it's no joke. I forget how much they were spending, but just on one plate. And what's funny too is like people that go in and they have to make a reservation to eat there generally a couple months in advance. And then when they sit down, they're like nervous because they want to make sure. They're afraid of the chef. They're like afraid that they're not going to eat it right, or they're not going to, be respectful to him. It's hilarious. And I'm like, why would you want to go eat where you can't even like eat in front of the chef, the person that's making the food.
Yeah.
But that's how good his sushi is, and that's how famous it is. He's so well known for being such a perfectionist that, it's an honor to eat his food. It's crazy. But that's the first one. The other one I was talking about is, they're both on Netflix. Jiro Dream of Sushi is the one about that guy. And then Sushi the Global Catch. That was a documentary that we also watched. And gets into more of how it evolved from being this old tradition to being, and it's not that old, it's fairly new, but it's evolved from being an older tradition to being a street food, and then now it's a fast food, and now it's kind of going overboard because people just eat too much. Food has become like entertainment.
Yeah, it's true.
And so they just use it to satiate, I guess, their desire to be entertained. It's like it's something to do. And I like food. I love to eat, but it has become, I can see where that would go on. Just start to just go over the top with it. But yeah, this book, I've got it at the library. This lady who wrote this book, there was a book called French Women Don't Get Fat. And she basically just talked about it from the perspective of, well, French people, they eat a lot of butter, they eat a lot of fat, they eat all these things, and yet they don't get fat because of the way that they live their lifestyle. They're active. They don't revolve their lives around food, and they take their time. They might spend 2 hours at a meal versus just 10 minutes shoving your face and then going on to the next thing. And so that was what that book was about. So Japanese woman did a follow-up on that and said, well, Japanese women don't get old. They don't get fat and they don't get old. So let's hear about that. I can't wait to read it because I want to know how to live a long life. So.
A long life, but be in really good health and mental spirits, good mental spirit.
Right. And the Japanese, I don't know if that's going to change due to this Fukushima thing, but they still have the longest lifespan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which they went from the lowest after World War II to the highest.
The lowest?
Yeah, they were the lowest after World War II. And
because of
World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it, the nuclear bomb, Hiroshima. I mean, I'm sure a lot of that affected numerous people after it happened.
Yeah.
for many, many years to come, or many, many years to follow, rather. And then it's just that the elements in general. Do you remember the name of that film that you recommended to us to watch? We watched that too, Lester, that anime.
Oh, it's like The Graveyard of the Fireflies or something like that.
Yes, The Graveyard of the Fireflies, and that is a Japanese anime. My son, this is how he got into Japanese culture, because he loved anime. He started off with an interest in anime, and then it took over to just being everything Japanese. And so we watched that film, Lester, and that's what that's about, is the life after the war ends, and how the poverty and the struggles and, the people that died. And so it's about these two orphaned kids. And it's sad, but it's beautiful. It's really well done film.
Yeah.
So I'm really crazy about the culture too myself. I had a lot of fun learning about it last year, and it was exciting to me, because I think that's one of the beauties of homeschooling is my son. He started off the school year with he was going to learn all about the Romans and all about the Greeks, and he wanted to learn about the ancient cultures, and then so I got all these books for him, and you sent me a bunch of these books for him, and some other friends sent me books for him, and then the beginning of the school year, and he's just like, I'm just not really into it anymore. I'm like, oh no, and but then you can switch up, you can just flow with it, and I was like, well, what are you interested in? I kind of want to learn about Japan. So then you just go, all right, well, let's just learn about Japan now, and then it's been a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, Japanese culture is amazing. Have you ever watched Anthony Bourdain?
A little bit, yeah.
No Reservations. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe some of his programs might be a little bit too adult, but he's done like 2 or 3 on Japan, and I think not the No Reservations, but the other show, I think Parts Unknown, where he kind of goes into the dirtier side, like of the culture and stuff. So I don't know if that episode or that would be appropriate for little kids, but his other 2 are really, really good. You should check into his stuff.
I will, because what I like about his stuff is he goes into places that aren't mainstream.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about that. There was this one guy, and I can't remember his name, but you can find his YouTube channel, or he's on YouTube, and you can watch these videos about Japan, and he did that. He went into all the parts of Japan that weren't necessarily mainstream. I'm trying to look it up really quick, but it was really fun. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can just go on YouTube and just be like Japanese documentaries, Japanese culture, whatever you want to type in.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much you can learn off of YouTube.
It's amazing how there's just so much to learn, period,
Oh, I know. Yeah. And then they have a TV station called NHK World, which you can go to their website, and they have free instructions in Japanese. And they're done in a animation, not anime, just in basic animation format and story narrative format, and then teaching. I think it's geared towards kids, but adults can use it too. And it's my son's been using that as well. So it's just so much available. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing times to be living and have all this information at our fingertips. You just have to want to learn it and put your time into it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, but when you do, it's a really good. It can open it can open doors in your life in so many ways. And I just finished reading this really good book called Fluent in 3 Months.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was telling you about it earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the thing that's interesting about this to me too, when I was reading it, just how how we're always talking about people are being disempowered, through the elite and stuff, and I see a lot of that coming through education too, in very subtle ways. Like this guy, he's from Ireland. And when he was about 21, he started learning languages. He knows about, I would say, like 20, like maybe certain, maybe he can speak in one but not write in another, things like that. But I think he knows he can speak about 8 that he functions in: reading, writing, speaking, and listening in. And he breaks down his process, and all of the polyglots that I've followed and seen, all of them don't really get good by going to school to learn a language. Mm-hmm. And they all talk about like how people have these ideas about, I'm too old to learn a language, or like I just don't have that language gene, or like they have all of these disempowering thoughts that they they really kind of just buy into because that's what they've been told, but they haven't really done any investigation to figure out if that's true or not. So they just kind of, just go for it. They just, what am I trying to say? Basically it disempowers them, right? And this is with a lot of things, not just with languages. But he breaks, down the myths, and then he talks about things about how you have to interact with people, and he talks about how to work on your accent, and he talks about, the differences between certain groups of languages, and it's really inspiring, and I think, if you're really interested in learning a language, it's never too late. I've seen with my students, I've taught children and adults, the biggest thing that, why it's hard for adults to learn is because they have a lot of baggage. Mm-hmm. In the sense that they're afraid of looking bad in front of other people and making mistakes. Right. Children don't really have that. Yeah. So, honestly, you just have to do it. It's a time investment for, like, in the beginning, but later on it's fascinating.
Right. I think it can open. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying it can open doors and